I apparently drew the short straw here because Robert just got to talk about all this cool software. But we do actually make a lot of other very interesting things. And so that's why I want to get into a little of this. We'll try not to get too deep into things. But before we get started, I just wanted to welcome Ivan. We're very happy to have you here.
Oh my God! Hold on. Stop. Don't go anywhere.
No, move that.
That's what I'm saying there.
Oh my God.
So in case you wanted to know where that picture originated, it has proliferated with lots of other people in the meantime, but it was John. John was the original one.
Oh, wow.
Very happy to have you, Ivan.
I have the other one.
Yeah, it was actually funny when I saw all the ones going on with the cats. I was like, you guys are being very, very calm here. You don't realize he can shoot lightning. It's very dangerous.
Lambdas. Lightning and rainbows.
Exactly. So, what this is really about is we all still have hardware, right? And that's going to continue for a long time because the software has to run somewhere, right? So, how do we get the hardware to behave more like software? Right? How do we get the hardware to essentially adapt, evolve, change, and respond to us in the same sort of ways? Because let's face it, if you have something like, I was getting into a discussion the other day with someone about ISSU, and we're talking about how, how most people do it. And the debate was whether, you could step up to a higher level, right? And say, okay, what's the problem we're trying to solve, right? Same sort of idea of, okay, what is the value of all this nimbleness? And is there any subset of that we're getting out of software that can also be achieved out of the hardware, depending on what sort of technology is available. And so to that end, you guys have heard us talking a lot and for a while now about things like OpenStack and REST APIs and so forth. But now I'm going to get a little more into some stuff around Puppet and Python and so forth. So essentially, how many of you are actually Python fluent?
Fluent?
I can be dangerous with it.
I'm Python-esque.
Okay, well, that means you guys know Python and you're honest, which is cool. This, and I actually kind of want to get some of your feedback on this. So one of the challenges I think everyone is having is how they define some of these DevOps roles and models and so forth. And you hear some people say that programmability is never scripted CLI. You hear people say that programmability is only APIs. You'll see that programmability is only this and only that. And so part of the challenge that we're having is, how do we essentially become that catalyst to get people more interested in this stuff, but also provide as many storefronts as we can to attract, right? Meaning that, if it turns out that you're more comfortable, writing stuff in Python, then we want to support you as long and far as we can. And so what we've done is we've essentially exposed as much as we can so far, and I'm not saying there isn't more we can do, and there are other slides that I have that are even better eye charts with more command line that you're all welcome to. I just didn't want to bore you with it here. But the point is that very much like, for me, this whole DevOps transition is a little simpler than APIs and so forth. It's a transition that happened in a lot of production operation shops in the late 90s and early 2000s, and that is that if you do anything live in production, I'm going to shoot you. Right? Don't type anything live in production, ever, right? In the Unix days, we used to test it, and then you prove it, and then you scripted it. And if you did the same thing 4 times in a row, you were a consultant, right? So, that sort of mentality has to evolve into this, where it's not that you're not still going to be prototyping stuff with command line. It doesn't mean you're still not going to be building stuff out in the lab to see if it works with command line. But we have to get to a point that either through building on top of your CLI experience, building on top of your programmable experience, that essentially you get to this point where you're never trying something for the first time, right? When there's actually customers involved, right? There's no more of this. I mean, if you consider, I spent off and on probably about 12 years in data centers. And just off the top of my head, I can think of 3.5, bear with me, 3.5 major outages that I caused by simply fat fingering a command.
Half?
Right? Yeah, because see, the problem was that some brilliant person decided to put the servers on battery backup, but not the arrays, the storage arrays on battery backup. And so when this problem happened, there was a bit of a cart before the horse issue. And
so you're not claiming full credit, but some credit. I got it. Okay, partial credit.
Bingo, right? I had a really good friend that took out all of Lycos Mail. Like, remember Lycos Mail, that cool dog? Took out all of Lycos Mail for like 3 days, right? CEO had to get on CNN and talk, right? And all he did was transpose a command, right? He had a corrupted and a non-corrupted. And you had to sync one from the other. You got a 50-50 shot, right? And I talked to him afterwards, and he goes, as soon as I hit enter, I was like Control-C, trying to kill, and it was done, right? And it was years ago. He still doesn't like to talk about it, right? We all do this. You can't help it. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. You haven't slept in 2 days, right? I mean, you're going to screw stuff up. So, as a result, don't walk that tightrope without some nice fluffy pillows underneath, right? And so this is all about whether you're comfortable with Python or whether you're more comfortable with something like Puppet. Basically what we want to do is essentially allow you ways to essentially take what you know, take what you trust, take what you have done as a repeatable rinse and wash, we know this works, and can it, right? Whether it's through an API, whether it's through a script, whether it's through whatever you want to do, and maybe there's even an evolution to it, right? You take many years ago, do you guys remember the company Veritas software?
Yeah.
They had this magnificent feature in their motif GUI where essentially everything you did in the GUI was expressed in CLI at the bottom.
Oh, nice.
Isn't that brilliant, right? And now keep in mind, it was easier back then because GUIs were mapped to CLIs. So, there's a little less work than it would be today. But the point was that what it allowed for someone who was good with the GUI to start seeing the equivalent of what they were doing in the CLI. And then we'd have them copy and paste those into just a straight script. And then as they got bored with that, you'd start teaching them how to add loops and state machines and this and that. And it ended up being this kind of transition platform to kind of help people ease into that. And that may be what was needed, right? That may be what is exactly what we have to do, is find some way to help people, whether you're coming at from the CLI point of view, whether you're already scripting and you're happy, whether you're already doing API work, whether you're already doing development work, wherever you are, you can jump into the stream wherever you need to be and essentially continue on. But at the end of it, it's about not doing things in real time when customers are involved, right? It's about how do we can this? How do we make this very, very repeatable? So, on that note, I'd love to hear from you guys as to, when you're looking at platforms and you're looking at programmability, how much does it matter to you whether that programmability is being provided through an API or through a scripted language or through a canned tool or through a homegrown tool? If you have the skill sets to achieve what you need to do you care very much how it's packaged? Or do you guys find yourself having kind of a knee-jerk reaction? The reason why I'm asking is because me personally, when I was running data centers, I ended up getting this kind of emotional reaction to the word API. Because people kept coming around, they were constantly talking about how APIs were going to solve the world. And I was like, I got kind of a little burnt out on the term API. It took me a little while to get over that. And so I'm just kind of curious as to, as this kind of whole DevOps models, transitions, where do you guys see this coming? I mean, do you guys have any views or thoughts as to whether, someone should only be doing an API model or whether someone should be doing a transitional model or where you see these things rolling out?
Well, the API actually has a lot of potential to it, not just in the sense of DevOps, but in the sense that if the API rather than the CLI becomes the standard interface to the system, then you can write to the API just about any interface you want. So even if you're more a traditional networker like myself, if you've got the CLI written to the API, then you're essentially bringing the management interface out of the system. So if you've got someone who likes the iOS style of configuration, well, write an iOS style config system. If you like the whole Junos Viata approach to configuration, well, write that interface to the system. The GUI goes to the API, the CLI goes to the API, and the software-defined stuff, controller stuff, goes to the API. So you have a consistent interface for any kind of approach that you want.
Yep.
And that's a good thing.
Totally agreed. Totally agreed. Totally. I think the only thing that the challenge is that the more power you have, the more chance there is you might also intimidate. And so I think that there's this sliding scale. I mean, let's face it, when you're doing stuff by hand, real time, you don't have a lot of options, right? You start scripting stuff, you have more options. You start using APIs and writing proper, now you have even more flexibility. But with that is risk. Right? And so there's this nice sliding scale going back and forth of how much risk do you want, how much nimbleness do you want, right? You can kind of slide it a little bit.
And you can adjust that comfort zone depending on your audience.
Agreed.
Yeah.
I'm sitting here thinking, I liked your point about repeatability and, in effect, adequate preparation and testing.
Yeah.
But I'm also thinking, so butt sentence negativity ahead. A lot of what I see in the field is folks to whom repeatability is maybe an alien concept. Working with sites where the notion that when you roll out remote sites, they should be cookie cutter and look alike is a bizarre, never been seen. Or people who are so up to their butt in alligators that they're scrambling constantly so they don't feel they have the time to prepare and be repeatable. So I think that some of the world is very ready for, and various forms of consumability are great. And the question I have is, how do you bring the people on board who don't see the value?
One of the most painful lessons I learned a couple of years ago was accepting something a friend taught me, which is that it's better to be consistent than right. And I didn't want that to be true. I didn't care about his facts. I personally didn't want him to be right. And because as an engineer, that's just a whole, kind of a horrifying concept at some levels. But what you find when you're building hot data centers is that you either conform or you die. I mean, it's like you can't, I mean, it's a whole cattle versus, pet argument, which I personally hate because I liked naming my box Scooby and Shaggy and this and that, right? But I mean, you recognize that you have to scale, right? You have to get to these levels. And so to meet that kind of repeatability, you need that kind of stability. But I will say that I think there's also a challenge right now in that a lot of people, when they talk about DevOps, they talk about provisioning, which is lovely for like a demo, but I mean, how many times do you stand up a switch? How many times do you build an interface, right? I think a lot of the challenge too is how do we essentially take these tools and figure out what's the care and feeding model, right? How do you essentially take 80% of the tickets you get and guarantee that they're all answerable by code, right? By script, right? That's going to take some time. There's going to be some massaging back and forth of that. But no, I think the challenge for that conversion is that my experience, and I'll tell you, the one shop I was at where we had this problem, we actually got to the point where we stopped interviewing people that didn't have production experience. Back then, this was a relative term that made sense. Nowadays, it's not really helpful. But back then, what we found is that if we were interviewing people that had never worked in a 24/7 shop, we couldn't talk to them anymore. They didn't have the sense of urgency. They didn't understand the criticality of it. They didn't understand that that consistency was there because you wanted to keep your job, right? And that being a cowboy and kind of going off on this crazy design was great if it solved the problem as long as it was repeatable, as long as it was consistent, as long as you could can it, right? And so I think that, I think a lot of people end up transitioning from that, from that lack of value and consistency to seeing tremendous value and consistency as they scale. I think it's an artifact of scaling. And I think that the challenge is that how do you get someone who's earlier in it to be proactive and start building the right methodologies and building the right practices so that when they do scale, there's not so much rewriting and retooling that has to happen, right? But in the end, like I said, it was me kind of really processing a lot of my own outages and my own challenges and so forth and realizing that my friend was right. It was better to be consistent than right. And because from consistency, I can do, I can diff, right? I can actually measure reality, right? So without it, but I think you're right. I think that bringing people, I think that's one of those transitions that people essentially have to walk up to themselves. I think you can't really force someone toward that. Yeah.
So to your original question about whether it's Puppet or Python or REST API or whatever it is, netconf. Okay, I personally am not a huge fan of Puppet because it's kind of a one-way push as far as I'm concerned. So that has some issues.
They call it Puppet for a reason.
Right. The real thing is it depends on who. It depends on who's the user for that solution. Right? Actually, if I put my networking hat on, I don't care. So long as everything's exposed through whatever interface was chosen, the actual question is, how do I access that interface? And the answer is almost certainly going to be Someone else builds another layer of abstraction in front of that, right? It's the web page that lets me provision the port, or it's the tie-in to the VM orchestration that then pushes off the same script in the back end. I don't give a crap. It can be Python for all I care, because I don't want to be the guy supporting the Python script. I'm not DevOps. And there's the problem with idiots like me writing scripts is we write very tactical scripts. I need to do something to save myself, like you said, the 80% tasks, right? I need to save myself time on the stuff I do 80%. I'm going to try and script that. But I'm not good necessarily at thinking, well, I'm trying to deploy, let's say, adding a VLAN in a fabric path domain, which is something I have a script for, right? Across 32 different switches. The same thing 32 times. You're damn right I'm going to script it. What if the 14th one fails? So now I have to think, okay, how do I handle that? How do I identify that? How do I make sure I've done some sort of three-phase commit deal going on? How do I roll back? This is all stuff we don't want to worry about. We want to put the parameters in somewhere and go. If I'm DevOps, I might care more. Right? And the question is, you know, the old, all network engineers are going to become programmers. But we may employ programmers to make our life easier.
The challenge I have with that statement is most of the network engineers I know, like myself, we know how to code. We went to school. And we chose not to be programmers.
We went into networking.
There we go. Yes! That doesn't mean that I don't love coding on the weekend. But I don't want to do it with my paycheck tied to it, right? I don't want to be someone that's not my world, right? So running from a bunch of network engineers going, ooh, we know you've secretly been waiting to become developers, here's your chance. You know, it doesn't work that way, right? It totally doesn't work that way. But I think that, you know, you hit it on the head. I mean, part of the challenge with this whole model is that a lot of people want to write point-in-time tools. Writing actual solutions that exist in your infrastructure for a long period of time require a lot more planning and a lot more architecture and a lot more trial and error and a lot more troubleshooting and so forth. And you know, I'll never forget my old roommate Jason, when he converted over to tools in the Unix group I was in, the day that someone came and asked for a feature. He lost it. He was like, what do you mean a feature? This is my tool. And like getting it into his head that no, it's not his tool anymore, right? It's now a company deployed tool, and he has to pay attention to feature requests and regression testing and compatibility and all these things. And it's like, well, wait, now I'm a real developer. This sucks.
Yeah.
Right?
That's the problem is we like writing the scripts because it saves us time, but we do not wish to support them once they're done. At least not for anyone except for me.
I agree. No, I totally agree. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't have to do this, right? This is the right way to do it. I mean, we have to make this very automatable, but it's challenging, right?
And what I think I'm hearing here is there's a spectrum. If you're a very small one-man shop, one-person shop, you may not have the time to develop standards processes, let alone scripts. And then you get to tactical scripts in a couple-person shop, but maybe you can't really...
It's actually funny is I found it a little bit different. I found that when it's one guy, it's automated to hell. Because he didn't have a choice, right? She had no option but to automate because it was only her, right? I met someone the other day, but like automated their whole environment and then was getting moved to another data center that's bigger that won't be automated. That's logical, right? But you're dead on in that you're going to hit different phases, and depending on where you are and what your comfort level is, you should be able to jump into the stream at any point you want and still get to where you're going, right?
Well, that takes an individual who's willing to put in the extra effort to build the tools to save effort.
I would extend that to say that it has to be someone that has seen that work before.
Yes, and I think sometimes that's the scarce factor,
is
knowing that you can actually do something like that.
Yeah, totally agreed. Totally agreed. Anything else? Cool. All right, so we have our little interstitial. So that is actually a Cisco 6500 that I found all beaten up. And
the Candyman.
So I did this image sponsored by Basket with FC. Yep. So just a little interstitial for you guys.
Oh my goodness, this is awesome.
So now I want to get in a little to the more canned part of it, right? So what we were just talking about is you write your own stuff, right? You play with your own stuff. Now let's talk a little bit about more shrink wrap stuff that still extends your capabilities, right? this gets even harder for a vendor, right? Because now you're picking teams even to a closer level, right? You're having to bet a little more on who's going to go, right? And so what we've been doing is trying very, very hard to essentially make sure that the people that we actually partner with, we're able to really go deep, you know, to really bring a lot of value, not to do this very kind of spread out, oh, let's do little integration things here and there, right? So the first one I want to touch on, and this is early, this is actually just, you know, for getting started in some ways, but, you know, Splunk for a lot of our customers has been a very, very powerful tool. How many of you have actually used or know or are familiar? Opinions?
It's fantastic unless you have to worry about paying for it.
There you go. There you go.
Right there. It's the best out there, but it's reassuringly expensive.
You know, and honestly, that's probably the best comment you could ever hope a customer would make about your product. I mean, to be very honest, right? That was cool, right? I mean, because you're getting a lot of value. Whether it's worth it to you in every environment, that's a business decision, right? But you understand that you're getting cool stuff for it, right? So, trying very, very hard to essentially not just look at the IP stuff, not just look at the Fibre Channel stuff, but really kind of go into how can we, not from the view of what do we get out of them, but why would they want us? Right? Why would Splunk want to partner with us? Why would they want to expose our data in their tool? What sort of things can we offer to them? And so I would encourage you guys to look into this. There is this lovely email address that's been set up. That's how you know it's early. And so we'd love feedback on this. But this is a little early, but this is something we're getting very excited about because this is a little more general. But it's the same sort of idea of how do we extend that hardware? How do we get more out of that hardware? How do we get more out of our environment? And it's a matter of, this is a more shrink wrap way of kind of processing those logs and messages and alerts and so forth. But the same idea is, very much like, the transition was made of not doing anything in production. A previous transition was made of don't wait for the user to complain, right? That's how everyone used to do it, right? You'd build a network out and then you just wait for people to complain. And that's how you knew things broke. No one actually had monitoring scripts or any of this jazz. You just waited for someone to bitch. Which is it's actually a fun model. It doesn't scale. And so once you start realizing that, hey, I have to be proactive, I need to be actually finding these problems before the user does, or at least have some clue that it's going on before the user does, that's where these tools come in, right? Now, how many of you are familiar with vRealize from VMware?
No.
VCOps. Oh, yeah. Okay, so we all know and love VCOps, right? So for me, VCOps is one of the coolest tools I've actually seen in a long time, not necessarily because of its actual functions and functionality, but because of its idea, right? For me, data centers, there's nowhere in the universe where relativity is more proven than in a data center, right? What is good, what is bad, what is fast, what is slow, what is old, what is new, like all this stuff, phenomenally abstracted and relative within a data center. And so what this tool does is basically allow you to go in and you install it and you run it for a while, and you don't do anything. And after about a week or two, you go in and you draw your baselines. This is normal for me. This is normal for me. This is normal for me. And then you start doing differentials off that. And that's a very clean, tried and true model. You see that same sort of model in a lot of other worlds, even things like Google cars, where they'll do differentials on the map of the real world versus what they see, right? And so we saw this and thought, wow, this is a fantastic opportunity for us to essentially take a lot of the data that we've been presenting to customers in tools like BNA and so forth that may not have as wide of an audience, and essentially work with VMware and find out, okay, how much of this can we offer to them? How much of it do they really want, right? And how can we start looking into how we did this? Well, we initially did this with Fibre Channel, with some very, very nice success. Obviously, the follow-up question was, why did you just release this for Fibre Channel? Now fixed. We now have a pack for IP as well. And so the idea is that it gets down to this whole concept again of waiting for a user to complain is not an alert system, right? Phone calls are not, alerts. So how do we essentially get to this point? And so looking at some of the kind of, basically not just from ultimately, when you get down to it, if you can't measure that changing, it's possible you shouldn't have bought the tool, right? I mean, when you really get down to that 80% of like what it really impacts us, right? These are the kind of things that you should be looking at. And certainly, the filtering capabilities, triage is always critical. Unified management is super neat, especially if you already like that style of GUI and you already like that interface and so forth. But ultimately, what this is really about is faster triage. It's about how do we essentially find the problem faster? How do we fail out or fail in the problem faster? How do we essentially address the issue faster? And so the more essentially logs and the more messages I can get from that. And when you get down to it, this is all just kind of like the Model T version of what's coming with business analytics and big data and machine learning and everything, right? This is a matter of, hey, your network is used by humans. Those humans litter data everywhere, right? Everywhere they litter data about what they like and don't like and this and that. You should be gathering that information and using it to build a better network, right? Something as simple as, you don't want to, say ship the same amount of bandwidth to that same stadium this year because last year the game was good, but you might want to shift even more bandwidth there this year because you find out that the lead kicker and the forward of this team both went to school 30 clicks away and there's a brewery there, right? Who knows, right? You want to be able to essentially start looking at how we really look at what our customers are and how they're and how we're serving them, whether we're serving them well. And so sometimes, I mean, you start getting into the some of the more machine learning stuff of this. I was talking to a customer the other day who remained nameless, and asked, what did you learn from your experiment? And they said, we love fishermen. And we all kind of cocked our heads and we're like, huh? And they said, we don't know what the correlation is. We just know that based on our study that fishermen, but people who fish, not like weekend, but people who actually like every year like fish on some sort of a schedule, like actually like, not professionals, but people who take fishing seriously. Those people are our best customers. They tend to stick with us the longest, they tend to buy the most product, and they tend to be the easiest in customer support. Now, they don't know what that correlation is, but I can tell you one thing. If you're a fisherman and you're a customer of that company, you're probably going to get better services coming up pretty soon, right? Because they now know who really likes them, right? So it's the same idea of how do we essentially, you take something as simple as a concert, right? When we were younger, they used to use lighters, right? Now they use cell phones, right? So cell phones lit up all over the stadium, right? So I was at some concert a couple months ago, and I'm watching the iterations of these flashes coming up and noticing that they're viral, right? So like one flash comes up and they all come up and they all stay for a period of time. Well, those are network drops, right? Those are technically periods of time where all those phones are not tweeting and not texting and not surfing the web and not streaming video, right? So, is there an opportunity there, right? Is there an opportunity to actually take that bandwidth for that 2 minutes or 5 minutes, whatever it is, and use it for some other thing, right? That's what we're talking about. How do we start digging really into not only how the systems are performing, but how the users are performing, how the environment is performing, and essentially try to do a better job of routing on reality, right? Of actually giving people, what they want now as opposed to what they wanted 3 days ago. So that's the end of the Dog and Pony Show. So questions?
My head's still spinning about the concert network drop. Like what? It's like holy crap! Wait a minute. That's like anyway. There's a lot to think.
Yeah, I
was wondering what your shirt said, so thank you.
Yeah.
I was like the whole time. I'm like, what the heck is this shirt say?
Yeah, I had the same. I mean, I was sitting in this concert. It was actually it was a Katy Perry concert. Which, by the way, if you don't like the music, visually, Katy Perry concert, visually insane. Like just visually gorgeous, really pretty concert. And I kept watching the slides, and I'm thinking, God, I want to see the MRTG. Like I want to see the graph. I want to see. I want to see what that does, right? And that's the thing: is it users use networks as humans use networks, right? And so you should be paying attention to those patterns, right? They're very, very informative.
I suppose the real opportunity is to write the stupid app that puts the lighter on the phone.
Oh, nice, nice. Oh, very cool. You can like you can turn it and it moves. That's,
yeah.
Oh, wow, very cool. Yeah, see?
All that money, right?
See? Yeah, no,
That
no.
probably cost me money. And like a real Zippo, it closes. So there you go.
Any other questions I can answer for you guys?
Wow.
So everything makes sense. You love it. It's awesome. But look, I mean, the whole point of this is to try to show you things that you can't get on your own, right? Because you guys are obviously, you wouldn't be here if you weren't good investigators, right? So, you know, if there's stuff we didn't cover, stuff that you were hoping to get that you didn't get, please email us. Please reach out to us. We, you know, would love to, you know, make sure that you have no unanswered questions. But you know, Ivan's here, so we have to be realistic, right? All right. Thanks so much.